What really caused the collapse of the USSR? On Christmas Day, 1991, the world watched as the iconic red hammer and sickle flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the very last time. In its place, the tricolor of Russia was raised, a superpower that had shaped the 20th century, that commanded a terrifying military and a vast empire, had just vanished. How does a global giant that dominated politics for 70 years simply cease to exist? What was the perfect storm of economic rot, political gambles, and revolutionary fire that finally brought the mighty Soviet Union to its knees?
Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't, as an encouragement for more of this kind of content.
The story of the end begins decades earlier, with an empire rotting from the inside out. By 1970s and 80s, the Soviet command economy, once an engine of industry, had become a bureaucratic nightmare. It was completely bogged down by inefficiency and constant shortages. A popular joke from the time summed it up perfectly. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. This broken system was then crippled by the massive weight of its own military. To keep up with the United States in the Cold War arms race, some estimates suggest that the USSR poured as much as 25% of its entire GDP into military spending. This starved the civilian economy of everything from new technology to basic goods on store shelves. Then came the disastrous, decade-long war in Afghanistan that started in 1979. A costly conflict that drained the treasury and broke the nation's morale. All this, combined with widespread corruption and an elite class living in luxury while regular people stood in line for bread, created a deep, bitter cynicism toward the whole communist project. Into this crumbling empire stepped a new, younger leader in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev. He could see the writing on the wall and knew that without serious change, the system would implode. He rolled out two policies that would define the era: perestroika, or economic restructuring, and glasnost, which meant openness. Perestroika was his attempt to jolt the stagnant economy back to life with market-style reforms. But glasnost was the real revolution. For the first time in generations, people were allowed to speak freely and even criticize the government. The idea was to expose corruption and get everyone involved in fixing the country's problems. The great irony is that Gorbachev wasn't trying to destroy the Soviet Union. He was desperately trying to save it. But his reforms had explosive consequences that no one, least of all Gorbachev, saw coming. Instead of fixing the economy, his partial reforms just created more chaos. Lifting some price controls while the old bureaucracy was still in place led to massive inflation and made the shortages even worse. Public faith in his leadership tanked. At the same time, glasnost opened a Pandora's box. The new freedom of speech didn't just expose corruption, it unleashed powerful feelings of nationalism that had been brutally suppressed for decades. From the Baltic states to Central Asia, independence movements suddenly exploded with unstoppable momentum. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and communist governments across Eastern Europe collapsed, it was a signal to the 15 republics of the USSR that Moscow's grip was broken. If Poland and Hungary could be free, why not them? Everything came to a head in 1991. As Gorbachev's power slipped away, another figure was on the rise: Boris Yeltsin. Freshly elected as president of the Russian Republic, Yeltsin positioned himself as Gorbachev's main rival, pushing for Russian sovereignty and a clean break from the Soviet system. The breaking point hit that August, when a group of communist hardliners, terrified of the Union dissolving, launched a coup to get rid of Gorbachev. They put him under house arrest and declared a state of emergency. But the coup backfired spectacularly. In one of the most defining images of the era, Boris Yeltsin climbed onto a tank outside the Russian parliament and called on the people to resist. The military refused to fire on their own citizens, and the coup collapsed in just 3 days. Yeltsin, was now the hero of the hour. Gorbachev returned to Moscow, but he was a leader in name only. The coup had shattered any real authority the central government had left. In the months that followed, the collapse was swift. One republic after another declared its independence. Then, in December 1991, Yeltsin met with the leaders of Ukraine and Belarus and signed the paperwork that officially dissolved the Soviet Union. A few weeks later, on Christmas Day, a sidelined Gorbachev resigned, finally accepting the inevitable. In the end, there was no single cause for the collapse. It was a perfect storm. A dying economy, the crushing cost of an empire, reforms that unleashed forces no one could control, and a tide of nationalism that could no longer be held back. Its fall ended the Cold War and drew a new map of the world, leaving a legacy that we are all still living with today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What piece of history should we tackle next?